Morning all, I'd like to go over another very interesting encounter between Kasparov and Kramnik, this time in Germany 1994 Munich tournament. Vladimir was playing white. I think this game is very interesting from the perspective of material versus quality versus time, which is something Kasparov has talked about a lot, these trade-off areas. And he's also hinted, in his own annotations, how sometimes it's visibly evident, for example, that rooks need open lines, knights need outposts. So give them the climate that they excel in, and their value actually on the board is going to be more than what we assign by default to the pieces. We might assign rook 5, queen 9, or 10 if you're being really generous, bishop 3 or 3.5. knight 3, etc. But let's see how this game showed material versus quality versus time. So Vladimir played d4. We saw the king's Indian defense being played by Garry Kasparov, which I think is very, very exciting defense, fighting defense. So e4, d6, knight f3, and we see the main line. So e5 here. Okay, now usually white just castles, and after knight c6 plays d5. This next move I think is Petrosian system, d5 immediately. There's kind of an invitation for a knight to get a juicy square on c5 potentially, but white playing bishop g5 can transpose into Avipar systems as well. Avipar is closely related. It's bishop g5 and d5, closely related ideas, and white's often trying to expand on the queen side and maybe undermine that c5 post, maybe playing for b4 later, c5, trying to get to the exploitable part of the pawn chain here, with b4, c5. Okay, so black for the moment though is kind of locking down white's queenside action with a5 here, so it's already ruled out b4 for the foreseeable future, and also maybe a knight outpost on c5 is going to be quite juicy. So the pieces need to excel. Knights need nice posts, rooks need open files, etc. Okay, bishop g5. And you might ask, what does a queen need? A queen sometimes needs exploitable targets and cooperation from other pieces, queens on the board. So bishop g5, and again we're kind of marrying Petrosian system with the Avipar system here. And it's a bit provocative, trying to create some weaknesses, this bishop g5. Black plays h6, breaking the pin. If he doesn't, then maybe queen d2, and h6 is going to be very difficult to achieve. So this is the time, if black wants to kick the bishop, to kick it now, perhaps. h6, and the bishop actually goes to h4, maintaining that pin, and encouraging black to weaken the light squares further. If g5, bishop g3, white can sometimes maneuver a knight to f5. For example, later, knight d2 after moving the rook here, knight f1, knight e3. f5 would be a sensitive point if g5, but also h4 would be a lever to open the h file sometimes. So it's an interesting provocation strategy, this bishop h4. Black, though, is going for that c5 square. Now sometimes it's a little bit controversial to put a knight here, because it can be a tempo gainer for white trying to sort of kick the knight later, if done carefully, to try and kick that knight and then later achieve c5 and later undermine black's pawn chain, the exploitable part of the pawn chain. White castles here, and now we see bishop d7, okay, which seems fairly logical. Black might be interested later in possibly at some point playing c6, but okay, bishop d7, let's see what happens now. Knight d2, okay, knight d2, which white would normally have this plan of expansion on the queen side with c5. Black plays knight c5, which is a kind of provocation. If this knight can be kicked, then it's kind of on the way to undermining d6 anyway, if white wants to inflect c5. So this next move, from a positional basis, looks like strategic crush-in process. If white can achieve this c5, damage black's pawn structure, it's a deducible move here, because another point of bishop d7 is to clamp down on white's queen side against this very plan of, say, a3 and b4. If for example, a3 was played here, then we get a complete lockdown with a4, which might actually be quite useful to black. Sometimes there's a bit of a downside, you're weakening the dark squares with a4, but here it's quite justified. This knight's kind of cemented, it's having a great time, the context is very friendly for that knight on c5. The bishop is helping lock down against b4. White wouldn't want to play b4 here, because this gives this target on the a file, and black would be ultra solid with a fixed target. It would be damaging white's pawn structure somewhat. So this is one of the main points, pardon me, of bishop d7. Thinking about it now. So a3 is kind of, you might think it's undesirable because of a4. And if you wanted to achieve the benefit of this a3 b4 plan without allowing black to play a4, you might think the move order to do that is to play b3 first. Cunning, because then you can play a3, and any time black plays a4 you play b4, there's no en passant. The knight will be driven back, you get back to this plan of playing c5, you've even got knight c4, there's going to be pressure on black's pawn chain, thank you very much. Now this move b3, yeah, it's a deducible move from a strategic crush perspective. Going backwards, what plan you want to achieve, and working backwards, you arrive with b3, because you want to play for this gradual expansion on the queen side with a3 and b4 without any lockdown on your pawns. However, chess is about material quality time. Whatever way you skin the cat, if you try and deduce the plan strategically, or even looking at forcing moves, still the underlying thing that you're managing is material versus quality versus time. So here, is it interesting tactically for black? Is there a weakness of the last move? This grand strategy of queenside expansion has kind of created a weakness of the last move, you might think. Surely, knight c3, if you're being ultra critical about it, there's actually a loose knight on c3. And actually, in terms of loose pieces, there's actually a loose bishop on h4, which is currently pinning that knight. And I've mentioned on the channel, sometimes you can really take the idea of docking computer really much further, much more effectively, if you combine it with two other things. Weakness of the last move, try and combine it with that. Forcing moves based on weakness of the last move. And this attitude of forward thinking, not deducible thinking, but induction. So inductive thinking is where you take the current position and you work forward to find a solution. So it's not about long-term planning or anything. So White's got that long-term plan of trying to inflict b4, c5, undermine the pawn chain. But black can use induction here, potentially. So basically, think about the docking computer, think about the weakness of the last move. And also, actually, as well as weakness of the last move, tactical vulnerabilities have actually doubled with b3. We've got this loose piece here, and we've got a loose piece here. So I'm trying to give you a clue for actually a brilliant idea now that enters Kasparov's head, based on, you could argue, based on weakness of the last move and forcing moves here, and this attitude of thinking ahead. What would you play here with black if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? You might want to pause the video. Okay, now this next move you might think is completely crazy. Knight f takes e4. And also at the same time, I think you might be depressed because, in some way, because the experience of strategy is to really plan ahead and think of a strategic plan. And can it really be that tactics can just walk all over strategy like this? Because that's basically what it is. White had this grand strategic plan in mind of expanding on the queen side, undermining the pawn chain, trying to make celebrate this knight as a tempo gainer with this slow, cautious approach, or apparently so. Apparently this knight was pinned. What's it doing? Leaving the queen on prise. Now if white takes the knight, then queen takes h4. There are two loose pieces here. So if you take the knight, queen h4 is not actually desirable. Okay, so what is going on? Why can't white win the queen? So he takes the queen, Vladimir takes the queen, and we see knight takes c3. And all of a sudden, we can't move the queen to c2 or c1 without allowing knight takes e2 check, another piece with check, the king moves, and another piece is taken, 3 pieces of the queen, with the knight potentially coming back to d4 here, nice powerful central position, and these knights are having a good time here, as well as 3 pieces for the queen. That's unacceptable. So the queen must protect the bishop here, queen e1. So what's the big deal though? 2 pieces for the queen? You've got to be kidding. It was also a centre pawn though. That's very interesting, this aspect of the centre pawn added into the mix. What does a centre pawn actually mean here? It was white's e-pawn. So 2 pieces for the queen and a centre pawn missing, but it's the e-pawn. That means this bishop might potentially have a greater time than usual. If black can ever play f5 and e4 without white's e-pawn blockading this bishop, basically hemming it in, that bishop's going to have a really good time in the position. So we see Kasparov's material versus quality versus time. Intriguingly, that this bishop is also, as well as the knights, going to be celebrating this position. They're all going to have a great party here, these mining pieces in this position. What can white actually do quite comfortably here to try and evict these pesky knights? It's interesting, you know, maybe knight f3 needs to be considered. We should check this out in the second pass. In the game, okay, I mean, you know, we're talking 7 units, you know, 2 minor pieces, bishop and knight, say 6.5, and the centre pawn 7.5, the queen's 9, so kind of 1.5 down on the default values perspective of pieces. But white is for some reason not keen to play knight f3 here to attack that knight. Maybe it doesn't do anything, in fact. Knight f3, as I mentioned, you know, maybe we can just protect that knight and liberate the bishop. And where is this knight going now? This is going back? That would be ridiculous. So a natural move like knight f3 doesn't help. And what about bishop f3? Again, e4. This e4, this centre pawn seems to be more than 1 unit, basically, because it's kind of liberating black's bishop to make it more than 3.5, if you think about it. Material quality time has been made very strange in this position. Very strange indeed. I mean, if white plays king h1, maybe, you know, black can continue possibly with something like a4 even, or just e4 again. You know, again, e4, f5, you know, black's kind of having a great time. So white played rook c1, offering the a-pawn. Whoops, this is more material. Knight takes a2. We're nearly at 8.5 now. The queen's only worth 9. So 8.5 after this for black. So materially, you know, black's not doing too badly. And we're winning the a-pawn here. This knight is also going to a juicy square, knight b4 now, and threatening knight c2. It's like, this is completely ridiculous. White was trying to follow a strategic plan, has been smashed by the docking computer, basically. Strategic crush versus docking computer. Deduction versus induction. This natural a3 has been remarkably punished. What is going on here? What can white do with his pieces? The actual climate of the position really doesn't like the white's pieces here. The rooks need open lines. Where are the rooks going to get open lines? Especially these dominant knights on these lovely dark squares and this bishop. Okay, bishop d1. It looks like a grovelly move, akin to Kasparov's massacre of Karpov once with stumbling knights. The white pieces are starting to stumble here. e4. Nice diagonal for the bishop. Rook b1. It's starting to look quite depressing. Rook e8. You know, he had to move that rook. He didn't want to lose that rook. And now this rook e8. This rook's having a better time than white's rooks. Look at the quality difference of the pieces. Queen e3. The queen needs targets. What target has it got here? f5, just supporting the e4 pawn. Okay, you might think, undermine the pawn chain, do something. What can white actually do in this position? There's such a grip black has here. And in fact, black might be even considering to just squash white on the queen side with moves like g5 and f4, liberating this bishop as well. That'll be starting to be worth more than 3.5. These pawns, according to Kasparov, if they go near to white's king, they start to be worth more than 1 unit, because they become attacking pieces sometimes when they get close to the king. So this can't be allowed for this pawn storm if white does nothing. But white is helpless here. Look at the pieces. The rooks really hate this position. This rook on b1, especially this rook on f1. Hopeless. h4. Trying to lock down against g5, it seems. Rook f8. As though f4 and these pawns are going to increase in value once they get closer to white's king. g3, trying to lock down on f4. All of white's moves are starting to be quite passive. Rook a e8. Okay. The rooks seem ready to roll here. King g2. What else? I mean, if white moves the rook, I don't know, we can check in the second pass, but it seems as though, unfortunately, there's nothing to do here. White's strategy has gone completely out of the window. There's no pawn breaks. It's just waiting to see what black's doing here. King g2. We see knight b d3. The knight on d3 is mirroring now the classic octopus knight game, Kasparov game. This octopus knight on d3 is supporting things like f4. It's not just a pretty thing. f4, and it will damage white's pawn structure, leaving isolated pawns, leaving king safety issues. This rook's going to be having a great time. This bishop's going to be having a great time. Black's pieces are having a ball here. Rook g1. f4, it happens. This is worth more than 3.5. This is worth more than 5. These pawns are starting to be worth more. G takes f4. Rook takes f4. Supported by that octopus knight on d3. Concrete threat. Rook takes f2 maybe now. If black wants to give up rook and knight for queen, does black even want to? White offers that. h5. Maybe he'd consider, I don't know, it just looks horrific now. g5 doesn't even bother taking on f2. Kasparov would rather torture Kramnik. Sometimes the fun of torture is more than the fun of getting a game point, maybe, for the sadistically minded. So rook f1, that pawn is protected. Rook h4. Okay, showing, this bishop is really ready to rock on this diagonal. Bishop h3 if black wants to pick up the exchange. Okay. Or queen versus rook and bishop if white wants to take on f3. It doesn't seem convincing. Rook h1, rook f4. Kasparov is toying here. Rook f1. Now building up pressure on f2. Now we see f3. A slight compromise move. When a pawn move is moved, especially the weakness of the last move is especially important to consider, because pawns cannot move backwards, they cause irreparable damage. So here, weakening some dark squares. Black plays now rook h4. Okay, what's the difference here with f3? Why can't white play rook h3, you might ask? It just seems quite a nasty position, and we'll check this out in the second pass. White plays f takes e4, and then we see knight f4 check, king g1. And the other knight comes in, supporting its fellow knight. And so this basic pawn sacrifice of e4 has liberated this bishop. The quality of that bishop has gone up. Quality of this bishop's great. Quality of these knights, phenomenal. The octopus knight strategy in play. White plays what you'd sometimes play in a Benoni to sometimes get the e4 square, at least. e5 vacates the e4 square. Knight takes e5. It's just so depressing for white here. Positionally, rook c1, rook h3, kicking white around. Where does the queen go? I expect it to be checkmated in this kind of position intuitively. Queen goes here and there's check. Queen goes here and there's bishop f5. Where's the queen going to go back to? e1? It'd be ridiculous. There's knight d3, for example, forking queen and rook. It's a depressing position. White plays knight f3, which seems to run into g4, and now White's giving back the queen here. He's fed up, he's had enough. Give back the queen. Knight takes e5. Try and get some pieces for the queen. Rook takes e3, knight takes d7. So let's take stock here. So black has just a pawn up here technically, if we count pawns. But it looks as though, has white swindled something here? It seems isn't an improvement on earlier. Well, actually we see check, forcing move, and now another forcing move. Rook takes f1, and okay. Although black is technically only was it a couple of pawns up, 4, 5, 6, actually 2 pawns up, 3, 4, 2 pawns up. This g pawn is worth more than the pawn. It's a dangerous passed pawn on a mission. g3. Okay, and this knight's kind of stranded as well. How's that getting back out of there? And what's worse, this pawn is, knight f4 would support the pawn. White plays king g2, and we see knight f4, and white just resigns here. He gives up. I think what we've seen in this game is a remarkable demonstration of fundamentally how strategic plan could be wrecked with docking computer plan. Deductive thinking could be wrecked with inductive thinking. We've also seen how the material values of chess, material quality, time, really depend on the position. Black's pieces were having a ball, even though black was technically material down. What I expect from a modern engine like Houdini, when we do this second pass, is that black wasn't doing too badly, even after immediately after the queen sack. Let's flip the board and check this. And also, it'd be interesting to do a reference check of that position. So let's get to the critical position. So we see e5, d5, standard so far, I think. So h6 is, I think, a fairly standard move here for black to play h6 to break the pin immediately, because I think otherwise queen d2. So I'm just clicking reference here. There's a lot of games to get a reference on. h6 is the most common move here. Bishop h4, knight a6. It's all fairly natural moves so far. Castles. Bishop d7, I think, is going to be one of the top moves here. Or is it? Actually, queen e8 is actually the most popular. Queen e8 breaking that pin. Yes, Kasparov, Morozovich, Gelfand have all played this before. Bishop d7 is 62 games. So queen e8 here is 3-3-4 games. For those who are interested. Knight c5 immediately 48 games. So queen e8 is the top move. So so bishop d7, and we see knight d2 is the top move here, 35 games. Topalov, Kramnik, Petrosian all played it before. So obviously Kramnik has played it before in this game. So knight c5 here, top move. In some respect, it's a provocative move because white's going to want to play b4 anyway. So why put the knight on c5? Sometimes this knight a6 is just trying to prevent c5 from white, not actually literally occupy c5. It's preventative for both b4 and c5, or trying to discourage that, or even allowing black to sack a pawn to get the knight to c5 after losing the a pawn if b4 is played with b takes a5. Okay, so going to literally to knight c5, 27 games. Queen b8, 29 games. The top move is again queen e8 here. So knight c5 literally is interesting. Bit of a provocation, and it seemed to totally work out. Well, when I say that, b3 has been played 125 times before in this position. Queen c2 21 times. f3 14. So this is the most popular move. So has this idea been played before? Knight takes e4. The top move here is queen e8, 68 games. The second move, c6, according to my database. Queen c8, 16 games. g5, 14 games. And equal with knight takes e4, 14 games. Kasparov, the top exponent of this move. But it has been played by Van der Wiel and Shakarachov before. In fact, okay, so 14 games compared to 68 of queen e8. So what is actually going on here? Now, in these 14 games, when did they start? Did they start from this game? Was this the source game? well, this game in 1994, all the other games are either 1994 or otherwise. And in fact, in Chess-Based Magazine 41, I think this line has been mentioned. Chess-Based Magazine 41, maybe as a major innovation. So it's been started to play here from 1994. So Golko beat Van Wely. Well, sorry, pardon me, Van Wely in this in this game. Let's have a quick tour of Golko Van Wely in 1994. So how did this pan out? Was it really sound? In this position, Boris Golko is a very, very strong player who's actually beaten Kasparov once or twice. He's got a very good score against Kasparov. 25-90 GM against Lok Van Wely. Played actually knight b1 here. This is just in time before that e4, before losing the rook. This is the chance maybe to challenge that knight. Maybe this is the move which might cast some doubt here. Very interesting retreat. Mentioned ridiculously knight f3. Everything's falling into e4 except this knight b1. There's a bit of a revolt against the knights. So Van Wely plays knight takes e2 check here, queen takes e4. Now knight d2. White is playing with material versus quality versus time. Get rid of this pesky bishop on the diagonal. Sacrifice the exchange. It's not even accepted here. Van Wely plays f5 and the rook moves. g5, f4, a4 trying to liberate this rook. fg, hg, g4. Very contrasting game to our main game. That black centre is under attack here. AB, knight takes, f4, knight takes c5, d takes, queen takes e4. Looks very different now. What's happened here? Let's follow through a little bit. Well, to the end of the game. The white queen is obviously having a great time here. The queen's having a ball, munching pawns on the queen side. What a contrast. Why isn't bishop d4 possible? Rook e8. The queen is helping stop this pesky bishop on the diagonal. And d pawn is crashing through. What has happened? What a contrasting game. c5 check. Offering the exchange again. Get rid of this bishop. Get rid of black's bishop pair. Pinning the rook on g7. Sacrificing the exchange here. Ouch! What a contrasting game. End of game. And black was smashed. So the move here, which might cast doubt on this thing, in the very same year, Groningen tournament of 1994, was this idea of knight b1. Okay, that's interesting. At least to engine check knight b1. And I think that's the most high level game in my selection here. And there's a mixture of draws and there's a mixture of results really. Most often the result is a draw actually. In 1995, 2 draws, 1998, 1 draw, 2002, 1 draw, or 2 draws. So this is interesting, knight b1. From an engine point of view, is this sound from an engine point of view? Here. White takes on d8. The engine likes white. So obviously queen e1 is absolutely forced. Knight b1! Oh dear. Kasparov was in a time he could take points because people didn't have Houdini maybe. I don't know. Or he could only use this once and once only. It was a one-off special surprise. If Vladimir found knight b1, maybe he'd have more of a fighting chance as demonstrated by that Boris Golko game. Knight b1 is what the engine likes here as well. Everything else might actually just be absolutely miserable. Although f3 is mentioned as well. But knight b1 seems to be the most fun killing move here. As mentioned in our alternative game. So offering the exchange sack. If this exchange sack's taken, black's got weak dark squares around his king. How could white play on that? Don't tell me another retreat, knight b1. This is getting ridiculous with this knight b1 stuff. But I mean, it just fits into the position. It's attacking the centre. It's maybe Okay, is white still playing for b4? The old strategic idea of playing for b4, potentially. Let's give black rook e7, for example. No, white doesn't have to play for b4. White can play for f3. White's got a game anyway. It's interesting. White's got something going here. It's not completely depressing. We ended up in a completely depressing situation. Kramnik did anyway. When he played here, rook c1. I would imagine the engine really loves black now. The engine does like black. Just take on a2. I think it's like Kramnik was stunned. After this stunning sequence of giving up the queen, to have to find knight d1 is asking a lot, maybe. I mean, just for the sake of looking at f3 though. Okay, black still got this this menacing, growing position here. I don't really think this helps solve the problems too much, even though it's slightly better technically for white. It seems to be a lot of fun for black to play with this dark square bishop. King's Indian players love their dark square bishop anyway, so okay. But anyway, okay, maybe that's technically that's apparently interesting. So the knight coming to b4, black is having a great time here with the threats like knight c2 here. So we see e4, the rook has to move, and the position is just growing. It's got so much growth potential. White's pieces are kind of stuck here. The rooks, I just hate this position. They haven't got the open lines. g5 is potentially a major threat here, I suppose, coming up. Not really. Or knight cd3. Okay. So h4 was played. Maybe that worsens white's position if actually. Okay, it looks pretty depressing anyway. This position for white. He is weakening his king a little bit, and f4 is going to be coming with more impact. It doesn't really help white in the long run to play g3 if f4 is coming anyway, and it's just going to cause structural damage. What else is there to suggest though? Black's just going to grow his position here very comfortably. It's just easier to play for black. So rook's nicely connected. White's rooks are not connected. The knights are nicely connected as well. We have connected knights, octopus knights, the d3 connection, and f4 coming in with huge effect here. Look at this, f4 coming in with great effect. It's virtually end of game here. It's just torture. There are many ways to win this. This is a kind of sadistic way, just not even bothering with taking on well, maybe taking on f2 gives white a chance. It's not as accurate. King h1 apparently, and what is white looking for here? Something, but it's still bad. So this is even more kind of sadistic, you could say. Okay, well, the rook coming back, toying with white a little bit. It's pretty hopeless. f3 damages white's position even more, one wouldn't expect, but it's already a pretty miserable position. If we go rook h1 here, out of interest, what would have happened in this position? E takes f3, apparently really good. Ooh, bishop d4 forcing move. If queen e7 here, queen e7 is answerable here with bishop h3 check. What is going on here? Rook takes, knight f4 check. Ah, it's miserable. Okay, it's miserable. Yes, let's go back. So in this position we see, okay, after rook h4 we see white playing f takes e4, not rook h1, f takes e4. So black's just liberated this dark square bishop as well. Knight f4 check. It looks like very thematic positional sacrifices to get that further boost of quality, giving up material basically for that further boost of quality and time. Quality of this bishop, the knights have gone up, the rook's going up, this bishop's beautiful as well. White plays e5 to try and do something, I don't know what else. It makes things worse in some respects. Okay, but rook c1, rook h3. Now white's going into the self pin. This move looks just terrible to play queen a7 here. If that's the only move available to white as a lesser evil, it's not worth. It's just miserable. It's just so depressing. Now white is threatened with bishop d4 check here. He's going to have to give up his queen. It's not good. White's just going to be material down at the end of this. Okay, so yeah, it's all downhill, I think, from here. So g4, white gives back the queen, but it's just black's got the material advantage now. Yeah, after all that, black's got this huge pass pawn. He's threatening knight f4 as the major threat, and bishop d4 as well. Knight f4 just to push the pawn to g2. Wow. So Kasparov really provides shell-shocking games. But there's a clinical defense sometimes inside of them, which means that they're not that repeatable. They're only good for a one-show special sometimes. This might be the case, that Boris Galko has found knight b1 against this line to give white at least some fighting chances. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.